Welcome to episode 1 of Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobbie Holmes. If you can't tell by the name of this podcast, I'm here to talk about murders, which I know sounds really morbid and disturbing, but there are evil people out there. Somehow I just feel like if I know all the bad things that can happen, that I'll just be better prepared when I'm faced with danger. But I'm sure it just really makes me extra paranoid. I still need to make my If I Go Missing folder, which was recommended on Crime Junkie, which is my absolute favorite first love true crime podcast. If you've never listened to their podcast, you need to. It is freaking awesome. Ashley Flowers, she's the host. She's just a really awesome storyteller. She just has a really soothing voice, which I know everyone hates the sound of their own voice. I just hope you're not all cringing hearing me speak right now. But my newest addiction, there's a podcast called And That's Why We Drink, and it's two friends telling stories. One of them tells a paranormal story, and the other one tells a true crime story, but their story's so messed up that it makes you want to drink. However, one of them is sober. She drinks milkshakes, which are delicious. I love me a milkshake, but I am totally team wine. I am about 2 glasses in right now because I'm so freaking nervous to be doing this. So if I start slurring my words together, that would be why. And That's Why We Drink and Crime Junkie, thank you so much for making awesome podcasts. You inspired me to go out on a limb and start my own. I had planned to talk about just one murder case today, but I was doing a little test run and I was just rambling my words, and it was about a 10-minute long podcast. So I decided to go ahead and tell you 2 stories, which there is somewhat of a theme here. They are both about children that murdered their parents. So we are going to instill the fear into every parent listening right now. My first story is about Tyler Hadley, a 17-year-old who threw a huge party while the bodies of his parents lay lifeless in a bedroom upstairs. I've heard Tyler's story covered on a few different podcasts, but I really enjoyed the way it was told on Crimes of Passion. It seemed like they told us a little more about the way Tyler grew up and maybe what caused him to snap. The mind hunter in me wants to know the why. Like, what made you become a killer? And if you've never watched that show, that's my shameless plug right there. On Netflix, Mindhunter, watch it. It's so good. But as a mother, stories about children killing their parents, it just terrifies me. I just want to check everything off my list of what not to do. Like, please don't let my child murder me. For real though, I just want to know what his parents did that was so horrible that you thought they deserved to die. And it turns out in this case, Mary Jo and Blake Hadley, that is Tyler's parents, they took his cell phone away from him, and that was enough to just put him over the edge. So let's take it back. As a toddler, doctors had discovered that Tyler had a hormonal imbalance. Low thyroid levels had caused him to have a very low self-esteem and depression, even as a young child, which, as a parent, I understand you feel really bad for your child and you want to coddle him and make him feel better, but they spoiled him and they gave him everything he wanted. There was absolutely no discipline in Tyler's life whatsoever. Tyler was excelling academically at school, but he didn't really have any friends until about age 9, where he met Mike. And about a year into their friendship, Mike and Tyler had decided that they were going to meet in the woods to hang out. And as Mike was approaching, he saw that Tyler was already there, and he saw that Tyler had climbed a tree and he had bungee cords. He was wrapping them around his neck and he was making them into a noose. And he yelled down and told Mike that he was going to kill himself. And you can just imagine, as a 10-year-old, like, you have no idea what to do in this situation, but Mike just yelled up and said, "If you try anything, I'm going to stop you." And Tyler was just like, "Oh, it's all a joke," and just kind of made it into a funny. And Mike didn't really know what to do, so he just kind of brushed it off. But as Tyler got older, his self-esteem issues got worse, and he had major body image issues. His brother even reported that he had bulimia. He had said he would eat an entire pizza and he would hear him go into the bathroom, and behind the sounds of a shower running, he could hear him purging, and then he would come out and say, let's go eat McDonald's. So, I mean, you hear this all the time in high school with girls and body image issues and bulimia, which you don't really think about it affecting boys, but I mean, body image issues can go both ways. So both boys and girls obviously can be affected by this. Mary Jo spoke to a doctor about getting a prescription for human growth hormone, HGH. And even though HGH can cause depression, and Tyler was already showing signs of depression, Mary Jo was just really worried about him being bullied at school because of his stunted growth. So she was willing to risk the side effects. Surprise, surprise, Tyler's depression worsened. He started self-medicating with drugs and alcohol, and at this point, he obviously had some mental issues, but his parents were just enabling the situation and behavior. Through all this, there was little to no discipline. There were no consequences for his actions. He actually started stealing money from Mary Jo and Blake, which they just realized, there was cash missing from their purses and their wallet, which they were well aware of. And I don't know, it seems like they didn't really do anything about it. Like, family members would come over and they would just warn them and be like, hey, if I were you, I'd just leave your purse in the car. Like, instead of like confronting Tyler and disciplining him about the situation, they just kind of warned everybody else that this will probably happen when you come over, which to me is just kind of ridiculous. He started skipping school regularly. His parents gave him an iPhone, which they just used to track him. And whenever they found out that he was skipping school, they took his cell phone away from him and they set a curfew for 11 p.m. This was the first discipline for Tyler ever, it seems. And he was just enraged. So at age 16, Tyler thinks he deserves a car. Blake puts his foot down and insists that he gets a job to pay for his own car. But instead of looking for a job, because that really doesn't sound like Tyler's style, he just started stealing his parents' car at night after they went to bed. And Mary Jo and Blake just were getting sick of it. They decided maybe if he has his own car, he would stop acting out, which just really sounds silly saying that out loud. But they buy Tyler a new car, like a brand new car, which makes him happy and turn the corner for a short while, but that really didn't last long. He was back to skipping school and staying out late, partying with his friends. And his parents were just frustrated. They didn't know how to deal with him, what to do. They actually tried having him committed to a mental health clinic, but that particular clinic did not deem him to be a threat to himself or others. So they couldn't have him committed without his consent. He would have had to check himself in, which obviously he's not going to do. But if they only knew that he constantly talked about suicide and murder with his friends, maybe this whole situation could have been avoided. Mary Jo eventually did find a mental health center for substance abuse that he did go, and he had weekly sessions. It wasn't something that he was committed to and stayed there overnight or anything. He was still able to go home. He was living his normal life as usual, which means he was still going out with his friends and partying. So one day he was just hanging out with his friends smoking pot, and Tyler takes a big bong rip, and then he announces to his friends that he's going to kill his parents. And no one took him seriously because Tyler's, like I said, he's always talking about suicide, talking about murder, all crazy shit all the time. So no one really takes him seriously when he says stuff like this. But he warned everybody, I'm gonna kill my parents. So Blake takes Tyler on a weekend trip to Georgia. So this is all going down in Florida. So they go to Georgia, where he makes a comment to, I think it's maybe his uncle, that the Menendez brothers are his heroes. And if you aren't familiar with the Menendez brothers, spoiler alert, they killed their parents. So disturbed by this comment, the next morning he told Blake, and Blake just kind of shook it off as a normal Tyler behavior, like, oh, that Tyler. Like, I can't imagine hearing that your son says people who killed their parents are his heroes and, like, not even be fazed by it. I'd be, like, freaking out. So Tyler starts planning his parents' murders. He decides he wants to throw a big party at his house, something his parents would never allow. Tyler gets a Facebook message from his friend Antonio. And bear with me here while I try to talk like a teenage boy. All right, here we go. Tyler, sup, brah? Antonio, chillin'. What you doing tonight? Tyler, trying to have a party at my crib. Antonio, your parents ain't home? Tyler, nope. Tyler again, well, they're leaving soon. Tyler updates his Facebook status. Party at my house tonight, maybe. Around 5 p.m., Tyler pops 3 ecstasy pills. And once the drug sets in, he goes down to the garage and grabs a hammer, walks up to the living room, and that is where Mary Jo is sitting at the computer working, and he stands behind her for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That is a long time. And this is Tyler's account. He's the one that reported this. Like, how freaking creepy. I feel like you can sense a presence like that when someone is standing behind you, but she must have been like deep in concentration or something. But if you are listening to me purely for support and gore freaks you out, now is the time to plug your ears. So Tyler, with the claw end of the hammer facing out, struck Mary Jo in the head. She starts screaming, which Blake hears and comes running down the stairs to, can you imagine? He comes down and he sees what Tyler had done to his wife. He's a really big guy and he probably could have overpowered Tyler, but after a moment of standing there in shock at what had happened, Tyler starts chasing Blake upstairs into the master bedroom where he brings the hammer down onto his father's back. And at this point, unfortunately, both Mary Jo and Blake have died. The family dog sensed something was wrong and starts growling at him, which I'm just like, poor baby. So Tyler takes, I think her name is Sophie, and it's a black lab. So Tyler takes Sophie and he locks her in the bathroom so that he can tend to the bodies. And it's just so sad. That poor dog, I'm pretty sure it was in there like the whole night of the party and even into the next morning, just locked in the bathroom all by itself, knowing something's wrong. It's probably in there freaking out. Okay, so Tyler wraps a towel around Mary Jo's head and drags her into the master bedroom, placing her beside Blake. He spends about 3 hours cleaning up the blood, and he's afraid that someone is going to come into the bedroom during this party, so he ends up just like grabbing a bunch of random junk and using it to cover up the bodies. Pretty much anything he can get his hands on. I think the article I read said he even grabbed like dishes and a dresser and just a bunch of clothes, like everything from the room that was just out and about. He literally just shoved them on top of the bed, on top of the bodies to try to hide them. So 8:15 p.m. Tyler updates his Facebook status. Party at my house, HMU. And if you're old like me and you spell out all your words, HMU stands for hit me up. I had to Google it. So a friend named Ashley responds, "Whoa, what if your parents come home?" Into which Tyler replied, "They won't, trust me." So Tyler drives to the bank and he gets out thousands of dollars from his parents' checking account, which he used to buy drugs and alcohol for the party. And the rest was supposed to be for his escape plan afterwards. Tyler wasn't an overly popular kid at school, so people didn't really know who was throwing this party, but really nothing else was going on that night, so it became the place to be. There were over 60 people that came to the party that night, and he encouraged all the teenagers to just do whatever they wanted with one rule: don't go into the bedroom upstairs. So kids were smoking inside, they were putting out their cigarette butts on the couch and the carpet, they were playing beer pong in the kitchen. I think they were like raiding the cabinets and eating all the food. I think at one point, one of the kids actually stole the neighbor's mailbox and brought it over. And that's like the one time Tyler actually freaked out and was like, go put that back, probably because he just didn't want the cops to be coming over. But for such a rager, Tyler actually remained pretty quiet all night. He had went outside where he saw Mike, his best friend Mike, and he revealed to Mike that he killed his parents. And of course, because Mike says a bunch of crazy shit all the time, Mike didn't believe him. But Tyler started going into detail about how he did it. And he had said he decided he wasn't going to run. He was actually going to kill himself by overdosing on ecstasy. So Tyler slipped away to smoke, and Mike went upstairs to investigate. He went to the computer where Tyler had told him that he killed Mary Jo, and he actually did see some signs of blood splatter on the computer desk. And then he went upstairs, and he was able to open the bedroom door past all the junk and shine the flashlight, and he saw Blake's legs sticking out. I'm like, how trauma. I'm sorry. I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny. It's a nervous laugh. But how traumatizing for poor Mike, friend of murderer. Like, ugh. I feel for you, Mike. So Mike ran home, and after a few hours, he worked up the courage to call the police. Tyler, the next morning, posted to Facebook, "Party again tonight. Party time's over, brah." So my husband told me, his only advice to me was don't be corny. And I am just like totally failing at that. Police arrive that next morning to arrest Tyler, and he was placed on suicide watch. He was technically still a minor, but eventually he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And this is so creepy. The other inmates that Tyler was staying with said that he would just sit in his cell and laugh to himself like all the time. And he said his parents deserved it and he regrets nothing. He actually thought he could make money by autographing newspapers about his case and selling them. So he would autograph his name, and then he would draw little hammers around his name and wrote, "It's hammer time." So obviously, Tyler Hadley is a complete sociopath. And that is my first story. Are you ready for the second child murderer? Because this one is a doozy. This is the story of Jasmine Richardson, who was 12 years old, not even a teenager. Let that set in. 12. Jasmine was your average girl in school that suddenly took on the goth persona. So, black hair, dark makeup, and she was a member of vampirefreaks.com. She met Jeremy at a punk rock show and fell for his dark side. The two became inseparable. Jeremy had his own persona. He believed he was a 300-year-old werewolf, and he actually wore a vial of blood around his neck. Fits right in with the vampire freaks, I guess. You would think if he was a 300-year-old werewolf that he would have a cooler name than Jeremy. Maybe like Klaus or something like that. There was quite the age difference in this relationship. Jasmine was 12 and Jeremy was 23. So, as you can imagine, when Jasmine introduced Jeremy to her parents, they disapproved. I wonder why, though. I mean, he sounds like a gem. Jasmine was enraged at the fact that her parents wouldn't allow her to see her boyfriend. So her and Jeremy plotted to murder them so they could be together. Jasmine sent a text message to Jeremy that said, "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you." A friend of Jeremy's reported that he came to him asking him for help in the murder plot, and it was because he was afraid that Jasmine would leave him if he didn't actually go through with killing her parents. Which the friend did not help him. Jeremy was all on his own. So, get ready. This is quite the poem Jeremy wrote here. Jeremy wrote on his Windows Live Space account. Payment. My lover's rents are totally unfair. They say they really care. They don't know what is going on. They just assume, as their greed continues to consume. She is slowly going insane. She continues to think that I came into her life to help her out and to stop what they keep trying to shout. It's all total bullshit. Their throats I want to slit. They will regret the shit they have done, especially when I see it, that they are gone. They shall pay for their insolence. Finally, there shall be silence. Their blood shall be payment. Spoken like a true 300-year-old werewolf. Very good, Jeremy. Bravo. The day of the murders, Jasmine and Jeremy entered the home. Jeremy killed her mother first in the basement. He was wearing a mask and carrying a knife. He stabbed Deborah Richardson 12 times, piercing her heart. Mark Richardson came downstairs after he heard his wife's screams. Jeremy attacked, stabbing Mark 24 times. Jasmine was upstairs where her 8-year-old brother Jacob was in his room. And this part is just so hard. I don't even want to say it. Okay. This part, it just pulls at my heartstrings. I mean, all murder stories are awful, but when children are involved, I just can't. I don't even want to talk about it. Jacob was pleading for his life. Jasmine initially planned to just kill her parents, but thought it would be cruel to leave Jacob without parents. So she stabbed him 5 times. Jeremy found her upstairs and saw what she had done, and Jacob was still alive, so he slit Jacob's throat. Not even more disturbing, but just disturbing. 2 hours after the murder, the couple was spotted at a restaurant, and they were laughing and kissing as they don't have a care in the world. Like, they didn't just murder 3 people. 3/4 of the Richardson family have been murdered, and the 12-year-old daughter is missing. Police initially thought that Jasmine had been kidnapped. No one expected that she would have been behind the murders. The next day, Jasmine and Jeremy were located 100 miles away and were both charged with 3 cases of first-degree murders. While awaiting trials, the true Romeo he is, Jeremy proposed to Jasmine via jail letters, to which she accepted. How sweet. Because Jasmine was 14 at the time of conviction, the maximum sentence for a minor in Canada, which is where this happened, was 10 years in prison. She served 9 years, released early on parole, free as a bird at age 23. Jeremy is serving life in prison. He is actually eligible for parole after 25 years, which just doesn't seem right for 3 murders, but I don't know why after the first full moon in prison, he didn't just go all werewolf and bust himself out of there. I mean, if I were a werewolf, that's totally what I would do. So there you go. That's my first try at podcasting. I hope you enjoyed these horrific stories. I hope all you parents were taking notes. The sad thing is, I mean, both of these sets of parents were killed because they were parenting. I mean, ridiculous. One takes a cell phone away, sets a curfew. The other just forbids her 12-year-old to date a 23-year-old werewolf. I mean, it just kind of makes sense to me, but too much for these kids. I guess you just have to start young with rules and discipline, because apparently if you let your child do whatever they want and suddenly take that away, it could be deadly. I do plan to keep up with recording, so please like and subscribe to hear new episodes. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Killer Stories Podcast. You can email any story suggestions to killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. But I've got to give credit where credit is due. Information about Tyler Hadley was taken from an article in Rolling Stone magazine, as well as his official police report. Jasmine and Jeremy's information was found on articles from Soapboxy and My Crime Library, and all that's interesting. Until next time, this has been a killer story.